Hello, everyone. This is Juan Felipe Herrera. I'm a member of the Literacy Awards Advisory Board at the Library of Congress. And as a matter of fact, I've spent time at the Library of Congress as a former poet laureate of the United States. And I'm very extremely happy and extremely inspired by whom I'm going to introduce right now, which is Mr. Denzil Mohammed, who's the director of the Immigrant Learning Center. And there's more to it. There is more to it. And we're going to talk about that. So welcome, Denzil.
Thank you, Juan Felipe.
You know, I'm very inspired, as I said. I'm very inspired of all the range of activities and the depth of vision and the expansive reach that your center has in Malden, Massachusetts. Can you tell us about that scope? It's just so profound and so innovative, and also very deep, given the fact that you do so much in concrete focus, and then you do so much in expansive focus.
Yes, we started out 28 years ago in Malden, Massachusetts, which is the city with the second highest concentration of immigrants in the Commonwealth. It has always been a gateway city for immigrants, various waves over the past century or so. And so there was definitely a need for English language instruction that was free. So in 1992, we began with 60 students and 3 teachers. Over the years, we've served well over 10,000 with what is really not a casual sort of kind of instruction. It's 5 days a week, sometimes 15 hours a week, during the daytime, not evenings, not weekends. So it's a very, very intensive English immersion instruction program. And over the years, because we're mostly privately funded, we are able to adapt to whatever the needs are for our constituents. So people come from around Eastern Massachusetts, and we're able to change the instruction. So that's why we have 4 levels of literacy, for instance, where we're able to adapt our program for who is in need. So if we see that there are more people who are in need of high-level instruction, we're able to expand those classes. And we do much more than serve immigrants. I mean, our mission is to give immigrants a voice. And we would like to think that we do that in 3 ways. One is through this free English instruction. But since 9/11, we realized that we also need to educate Americans. Americans know very little about immigrants and immigration, the immigration system. So we would like to help change the conversation on immigration in the United States. So I direct our Public Education Institute, which educates Americans about immigrants and their contributions. And we also give immigrants a voice through research. We partnered with George Mason University in Virginia and launched the Institute for Immigration Research 8 years ago. And they look at immigrant contributions on a national level, everything from immigrants in trucking and healthcare to immigrant Nobel laureates. You'll be surprised to know that more than 1/3 of America's Nobel laureates were born in another country.
That's incredible. You know, you speak of the English learning program that you have, and you know, what's the process? What's the process that you have come up with and developed during these years? It's such a difficult transition. You know, stepping in. I remember stepping into first grade in my experience, not speaking English, and it was just a violent clash physically. Being punished for not knowing English and being out of sorts and not knowing how to even walk through the halls or walk into the class. So how do you do it? How do you get that? What process do you have of step 1, step 2, step 3? Hello, how are you? Sit down. I mean, you know how it is with it. The first step is so critical. You know, just walking in and saying, "¿Cómo estás? Siéntate, por favor. You know, you're welcome here. How are you?" You know. So, what are some of the steps that you have, or process, or approaches?
We pride ourselves in very highly individualized instruction. And that goes all the way to the very first time an immigrant or refugee adult steps into our doors. Their testing is typically administered by a counselor, so that we are keenly aware that they may be bringing all sorts of, a lot of backgrounds and maybe even trauma with them while they navigate the American system and take that very courageous step of trying to learn English. And might I just add that contrary to many of the myths that are out there about immigrants, our waiting list is typically over 1,000 people. Immigrants and refugees really desire to learn English. So we've never had to advertise, ever. We've always had a waiting list of people wanting to learn English. So very individualized testing. And then once we have a space available for them, we reach out to them by mail. Right now it's by email. And they can enter the classes where they best fit. And again, because we're so highly individualized, there's a lot of differentiated instruction, particularly in our literacy program. So there may be a class of 30 people, but that's divided into 6 possible different groups or 10 possible different groups, depending on where they are. They may be good at oral delivery of English, but not writing. Or the converse may be the situation. So even homework instruction is very highly differentiated.
Yes. Well, that's a lot, to have it kind of a spectrum of the process, and like you said, so differentiated. That's incredible, And I was also, and what you also mentioned about teaching, what you said, Americans, and what is that all about? What's involved? Because there's so much, as you know, as we all know, as everyone knows, there's just so much friction, and the kind of intensified, the intensification of differences, quote unquote, and the intensification of stereotypes. So how do you approach people that are not part of the program, that are outside the program?
Immigration is as American as apple pie, which in and of itself was brought to America by immigrants. America is an immigration inextricably linked. And the fact is that every immigrant group that came here, from the Germans to the Irish, Italians, all the way up to the present of Mexicans and Muslims, experienced some sort of backlash. We don't do advocacy, but we want to change the conversation on immigration. So we give groups that are out there, grassroots groups, the tools that they can use to work in their work to help change the conversation from the community level right up. So a lot of that deals with, the facts. When we started out this Public Education Institute after 9/11, we commissioned research. Are immigrants a net benefit to the US? Has that always been the case? And of course, we commissioned the research and we found out, well, yes, that is true. Why is that? Immigrants are inherently entrepreneurial. People who pack a bag and leave a country, leave everything behind, leave everyone they know, that's a very entrepreneurial act. They take a risk hoping that something will be better for them and their children. And so that's the message we want to spread around the country through webinars, through books, through research, conference presentations, community dialogues. And over the years, I think we've had a lot of great impact within the state of Massachusetts. Our work has helped shape the New Americans agenda that was commissioned by former Governor Deval Patrick. And we seek on a national level to really help change the conversation into something that is fact-based, into something that is positive. And particularly in the last few years, emphasizing common values, shared prosperity. What happens to immigrants is not something that simply happens to another group. Immigrants are part of our economy. They're part of our communities. They're our friends, our neighbors, our employers, our employees. So letting people know that what happens to immigrants happens to everyone.
Good, that's beautiful. We need more of that. And how do people respond that are not aware of all this? How do people respond that are not aware of all the amazing, incredible histories that you just described? They go, what do they go? They go, oh, this is great. Or do they think about it? Is there a way to find out how they feel once you present the materials and the people and the exposure and the learning to the quote unquote outside world.
People are often surprised.
Yeah.
Even people who work with immigrants, some of the most basic facts, like
Yeah.
immigrants make up less than 15% of our population. That's the entire foreign-born population of the US. And yet there are people who think it's 50% or 30%. And it's actually a lot less. And it speaks to the fact that we have been fed throughout our lifetimes a lot of sound bites, a lot of myths.
Yeah.
Immigrants take jobs. Immigrants bring disease. Immigrants bring crime. We are being overrun by immigrants. And you, as a poet, would know the power of the words that we choose, like infestation or invasion.
Yeah.
And so people are often very, very surprised at some of the most basic facts, that immigrants are critical to our labor force. They are overrepresented in our labor force.
Yeah.
During this pandemic, especially, we've seen how immigrants are overrepresented in essential services. They're taking care of the sick, people who have COVID-19. They're taking care of our baby boomers. They're overrepresented in our healthcare industry, in our food and agriculture, in sanitation and transportation. There are states like Nebraska where without immigrants, the meatpacking industry would collapse.
That's right.
In California, as you know, agriculture, hugely impacted by immigrants.
That's right.
And we're talking about documented and undocumented immigrants.
Yeah.
Undocumented immigration to the US has always been a thing. It is not something that is new. And as you know, the history of the Bracero program and others, there was always a flow of people back and forth.
Yeah.
So a lot of the very basic information Americans don't know. The immigration system itself is as complex as the tax system. You know, there is no line, for instance. So getting a lot of those basic facts often surprises people. I think it opens their eyes. We've even spoken in schools to children. I've spoken to fifth graders who themselves, they come up to me afterwards and said, everything you told me is exactly the opposite of what my mother has been telling me. And so even children are being fed these messages. So A, awakening them to the facts, B, tapping into more positive thinking about our shared values, that we have much more in common. An immigrant mother and a US-born mother think the same things.
Yes.
They want their children to be healthy, to be bright, to have a chance at the future. There's not much that separates us. So emphasizing that shared humanity is something that we really try to do.
I think that's the heart of it. I think that's another reason why your center is so important in what you've done and developed for other centers to tap into, and perhaps to just agree with, because they're doing it also.
Well, you know, we do have a brand new youth board. One of the ideas being that young people, you know, one of our main audiences is teachers, educators. As I talked about, fifth graders who are being fed wrong information. Young people need the right information. They need to change the conversation. They're going to be our leaders, and we want them to have the facts. We want them to have a perspective of America that is not insular, that is global, because America is such a diverse place. So one of the things that we've started is a youth board of high school students, with the idea of they being able to go out into their schools and spread that message that America is a nation of immigrants. During this pandemic, one of the things that several of our youth board members has done is they've actually started a free tutoring program. So they've been able to recruit dozens of high school students across Massachusetts to tutor children in low-income or rural areas who may not have access to solid virtual learning. Many of those children are children in immigrant families. And that model has actually spread to Los Angeles, where a group of high school students who are looking to do more community service are looking to replicate that program.
That's amazing. That's good. That way the program has longevity, and it replicates itself, and it expands and deepens. that's great. It's not, your program is not, your center is not just a one-dimensional center. It has many dimensions, and that's what we need. Let me go back, or let me go forward to dialogue. There's a lot of learning taking place. There's a lot of tutoring taking place. There's even publishing taking place, and expanding the radius of the center in terms of materials and what you do and how you do it. What about dialogue? Is there a way that you, or maybe this is dialogue, but is there a way that you put two different people side to side, or a group, and somehow how you work with groups and individuals, those that are in the center, immigrants, and those that are not immigrants, or already are involved in the core or in the centers of power in society. Let's just put it that way then. To talk with each other and to listen to each other, as opposed to read about each other or see each other on the screen or in a book. Is there any kind of face-to-face encounters where we go, this is who I am, or people are in a circle? Do you do any of that?
We try to get other organizations, grassroots organizations, nonprofits, the tools to be able to do that. So there's a lot of recent work by organizations like More in Common, the Frameworks Institute, even the California Immigrant Policy Center, that have looked at how do you talk about immigration? What kind of framing do you use? So a lot of our work over the past few years, particularly since 2017, has been on that immigration narrative. Words to use, words not to use, what sorts of frames to use. So for instance, don't say things like coming out of the shadows. That has a negative connotation.
That's true.
Don't, in place of immigrant, use words like friends, like community members, like co-workers, like soccer coaches.
That's right.
In terms of framing, think about immigration as part of the whole. It's a community-wide issue. It's not just something that affects one group. Right. So a lot of the work I do at our Public Education Institute is to give other organizations those tools so that they can spread out and facilitate those conversations in their churches, in their after-school programs, in their community dialogues. We ourselves go to libraries and other community organizations across the state and help facilitate those conversations. Sometimes it can be a little bit heated, in no small part because people they believe a lot of the myths and misinformation, and it's really difficult for them to divorce themselves of that. Sometimes when they see an immigrant telling them these things, they may or may not want to believe it. So giving US-born people those tools has been crucially important. Our research institute at George Mason University, the Institute for Immigration Research, they're looking at things at a policy level. So looking at immigrant contributions and how integral they are to our labor force, to paying into Social Security and Medicare. They are trying to help spread that message through their policy work and their research. And I think as for our students, they learn integration in our center. You walk into any particular classroom pre-COVID, and you will see a young Dominican guy sitting down next to an older Chinese man, and they're working together on a project. You see Syrian refugees in hijabs talking to Haitian immigrants on temporary protected status. They learn about each other. They learn about different cultures, religions. They learn how to get along. They learn how to depend on each other.
I'm thinking, you mentioned COVID. How did COVID impact everyone at the center or the program itself?
So our classes moved online even before the state of emergency was declared in Massachusetts. We had, unfortunately, no model to work with when it came to something like this. So our teachers, particularly our literacy teachers, had to overnight become A, tech experts, and B, innovators in terms of how they led their instruction. So not only using things like Zoom, but also Google Hangouts and Meetups, using FaceTime, WhatsApp, which is very popular among immigrants in the US. Teachers were using that to help in their instruction. Our literacy program, particularly, those students it's in such a delicate educational stage.
Mm-hmm.
We needed to make sure that those students weren't lost. And so some of our illiteracy teachers actually shifted to phone conversations. And their day of instruction was literally one phone call after another with one student at a time, going over English pronunciation. How do they repeat the statements they got for homework to practice? So very, very individualized instruction.
I wasn't expecting the phone conversations. That's something that I want to think about. And here in Fresno, where we are, and I think that's a great thing. Makes it intimate, makes it personal, and it's listening to the voice very closely. Also, it's right here. It's right here. It's not out here. Well, congratulations on that approach and all you're doing in that area. You have so much culture. We come in with so much culture and so many traditions and celebrations, and our language and languages, different regions, different generations. Is that something that comes into the writing or the expression or certain events, or you really are operating at different levels? Economics, history, the larger society, as opposed to or in harsh or highly defined difference from our cultural abilities and cultural knowledge and traditions, celebrations, and beliefs, and all that. Do you deal with those aspects of the people?
So our instruction is very highly contextualized, and so civics is incorporated into every class, from our literacy program to our levels 1 through 4 ESOL program, English language for speakers of other languages. But even though that we are an English immersion, English only program,
Yes.
which is a little bit more challenging, but we find it to actually be more effective.
Mm-hmm.
We emphasize that everyone's culture is important.
Yes.
Everyone's culture needs to be shared. Yes. Everyone's culture needs to be transferred and brought to their homeland. We host international days where each classroom is a different region, and students dress up and bring their foods. The mayor comes, members of the public come, elected officials come. And so we both instruct on US culture and emphasize that their culture is also something that's very important and very valuable. And because we have students from, we've taught students from over 140 different countries. Our top countries of origin right now include Brazil, Haiti, Morocco, Dominican Republic, El Salvador. So it's a lot of different languages and cultures and backgrounds and religions rolled into one, but they are reminded every day that those things are very important.
Yes. Because I've been thinking about the cultural sources. We have, resources, celebrations, and all those things that we think about most of the time as cultural. But I've been thinking about, deep sources of cultural knowledge. That is kind of the original materials or early materials in our particular cultures that contain or that present ethical values. Are those things brought up at all? Only because that's an area that I'm really interested in, and I think that we have a lot of we carry and we have very deep ethical value systems in our cultural roots, whether they're in scrolls or books or stories, very early stories, not recent stories, but very early stories. And they kind of guide us through life, and they kind of assist us in the kind of changes that we face, for example, in this country, the United States. Is that brought up, or is that just a little too deep, or that's in the books that you mentioned, the publications, or in some discussions? I'm just curious about that, because it's so key and so beautiful and so important, and it's easy to kind of just build sediment on top of it and then recreate the culture in more contemporary manners, even though we do have much deeper layers of where we come from.
I think a lot of different cultural and ethical qualities help. They actually help inform our instruction.
Yes.
So, for instance, we have teachers who are from Haiti,
Yes.
and they use oral tradition in their instruction. They use chanting and singing.
Oh, yeah.
We have teachers from Algeria who also bring in their traditions into actual instruction. And so students are exposed to these sort of different cultural facets. In terms of ethics, I don't think that we necessarily get into that level of things, but it certainly helps inform our classrooms.
Yes, I like that idea of chanting and singing in the classroom. I really do.
It helps remember.
Right, because sometimes when I used to teach Chicano Latin American studies here in Fresno State, I would start to sing. I said at one point, I said, I'm just going to kind of sing the lessons today, or I'm going to sing the discussion. I mean, not in a fabulous, operatic voice, but I'm just going to sing whatever way I can. And it just changes everything. It kind of, people begin to melt a little bit, and the doors begin to soften and open. And I enjoy that, and I can see how that can be so beautiful and valuable, given our various traditions in a classroom format or in a smaller group setting. So I salute you on having those that openness in the center and in the programming and in the teaching. And I bet you it really brings out the heart, right? All of a sudden it's no longer a classroom. All of a sudden I'm at home again. And even though it's a great classroom, all of a sudden I'm really connecting to this class, and as a matter of fact, I'm joyful, right? All of a sudden there's joy involved in the learning and teaching
And
and growth.
For many years, we actually ran a Theta program, and that was one of the last levels of instruction where students, in order to build their confidence, in order to public speaking, in order to improve their writing and delivery, they would actually write plays themselves. And so they got to actually bring their cultures and backgrounds and act out for the public.
Beautiful. Now we're really talking. Right. Theater. It involves a group, and you're right. The voice. It took me a long time years and years and years to really express myself. I kind of was a silent student for many years, and my third grade teacher, because of my language and because of living on the outside of the city and being a farm worker and feeling kind of absorbing the negative perceptions of who I was and who we were, and then not being allowed to speak in Spanish and then being punished for that. My third grade teacher, Mrs. Lelia Sampson, invited me to come up in the front of the class, and she says, "Why don't you sing a song?" And I had never participated in a classroom. And she says, "I'm right here next to you, okay? Face the class and sing a song, Juan." That was a challenge of the century. And I sang Three Blind Mice, and I did my little best. And she was right next to me, and she turned around and she said, "You have a beautiful voice." And that shattered all the negative barriers that I had been dragging around since first grade, second grade, up to third grade. So I'm so glad that you bring up the voice, which is at the core, don't you think?
I absolutely agree. And giving students that voice, students from other countries, to be able to go into doctors' offices and be able to talk to them, to be able to talk to the teachers of their children. They give English language is that vehicle toward agency. It allows them to be able to help chart the courses of their lives better, that of their children, when they're able to talk to someone in City Hall or talk to their employer, talk to their doctors, at PTA meetings. We have stories of students in our literacy program who not only learned basic English, but also learned civics and learned their rights. And they were able to tell their employer, turn up the heat. It's February, we are cold.
Yeah.
If you don't do that, I will call City Hall.
I'm glad to hear that too. That was very difficult for me, challenging or contesting or simply putting out our point of view. There's so much pressure. For me, I felt a lot of pressure to do that because I was brought up with, respect for our elders and respect for my mother, of course, and my father, of course. But it was kind of deep respect. It was not just, hey, I respect everybody. It was kind of a deep respect. And no matter where I went, there it was. I had deep respect for elders and deep respect for teachers and deep respect for administrators. So it was difficult to say I disagree. Mm-hmm. So I'm really happy that you work through all those things in your programming, and your students and the students of the center and the centers that you work with have all those tools to kind of learn the basics, exchange and write and express and contribute. And also, let's bring out your voice now. You've learned all these things now. Okay, it's your turn. And so I appreciate what you're doing. And thank you so much, Dr. Mohammed. And keep up the great work. And congratulations on the American Award for Literacy. And I want to follow up on your center just because I'm so interested in education also and poetry. Muchas gracias. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Juan Felipe.
Thank you, Denzil.